The only reason I remember what day it was, April 12th, 8:46 a.m., is because that's the exact moment the espresso machine in the break room started spewing black sludge like it was possessed. The smell hit first, like burnt rubber and broken promises. That same moment, my manager Greg shouted across the room, "Sandra, can you check why Q1 burn rates aren't matching the budget dashboard again?" Like it was a damn mystery, not the same weekly scavenger hunt for numbers no one wanted to admit they fudged. I didn't respond right away. I was watching the espresso bubble over like it had secrets to spill. Fitting, really. This place had more buried bodies than a mob accountant. People here talked about culture and transparency, with the same breath they used to book fake vendor calls and vanish budget overages like David Copperfield in khakis. I was Sandra, mid-level analyst in finance. Been here 7 years. No drama. No company retreat selfies. Just clean spreadsheets and a silent war with the office thermostat. I had a desk near the emergency exit, which, if you ask me, says more about a company's priorities than any mission statement. They trusted me enough to hand me every single cost center, but not enough to invite me to the quarterly leadership huddles, where half the budget died and the other half got spent on ergonomic beanbags no one asked for. A while back, HR launched this shiny professional development reimbursement program. Big internal email campaign, fireworks in Google Slides, diversity quotas in checkboxes. Grow your skills, become your best self. The slide read like a shampoo bottle for your resume. No one really cared who used it. No oversight. No required pre-approvals unless you were trying to go full MBA. So I clicked the link and quietly signed up for a $49 webinar on detecting vendor fraud. Then another, and another. A whole little buffet of forensic accounting courses that didn't raise a single eyebrow. Turns out, no one monitors the nerds when the sales bros are setting literal fire to the T and E card in Cabo. Oh, hey, real quick. Before I get too deep into this rabbit hole, if you're into stories like this, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. And maybe drop a like. Helps more than you know. Keeps the stories flowing and the coffee strong for the crew behind the scenes. Anyway, where was I? Right, training courses. After about 6 months, I had stacked up more forensic modules than your average junior auditor at Deloitte. I didn't brag, didn't post any certificates on LinkedIn, didn't even tell Greg, he once referred to Excel as that calculator thing. I was just watching and learning. That's the thing about working in finance. You start to hear the whispers before the storm, an extra zero in a miscellaneous expense column, a sudden vendor name that no one knows but gets approved anyway. Strategic growth outlays with no scope of work attached. I saw it all. I logged it. Quietly, meticulously. My best friends were pivot tables and bank statement exports. I treated each one like a crime scene. But still, I played the part. Office potlucks. Budgeting meetings where the CFO, a guy named Troy, used phrases like synergy bleed and capital foresight while I mentally translated them into cover your ass and don't ask questions. I wasn't some financial Batman. I was tired, but I knew something was off, especially after Troy retired early last fall and the company brought in a new CFO, Derek Langston. Straight-cut jawline, Harvard tie, corporate purge energy. The kind of guy who says, let's take this offline right before he guts your department. Langston moved in fast, killed off 5 teams in a month. Reorgs, budget freezes, efficiency protocols. He shook hands with the board and waved the bloody sword with the other. And no one blinked. People smiled through severance talks like they were doing yoga, not getting canned. I kept my head down. I wasn't loud, but I was listening, watching every payment, every revised contract. The finance tools we used weren't built to hide fraud, they just didn't care if you buried it deep enough. But me, I cared. One Tuesday afternoon, I noticed something. A payment batch labeled vendor cleared confidential, $28,742. No vendor code, no matching contract. Then again the next week, $31,900. I flagged it in my own spreadsheet, didn't even email anyone. Why bother? I wasn't the kind of analyst they promoted. I was the kind they forgot still had access to the back-end finance tools no one else bothered to learn, so I kept attending my little online classes. Reading about shell corporations, how procurement fraud starts with vague scopes of work and ends with someone buying a speedboat under the name Client Expense Reserve. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Because I knew the day would come when they'd come for me too. They always do, and when they did, I wasn't gonna cry. I wasn't gonna beg. I was gonna be ready. The first time I saw Derek Langston, he was standing in front of the break room fridge like he owned the air in it. Black suit, white shirt so stiff it could have held up drywall, and a Bluetooth headset glued to his ear like he was day trading organs. HR had just announced him via an all-staff email with 3 bullet points: experienced, visionary, strategic, translation, cold, culling, calculated. I'd seen his type before, CO's favorite golden retrievers, sent in to cut fat but usually just end up bleeding out the backbone. By Friday, half of finance ops was gone. The org chart got posted on SharePoint with names just missing. No farewell emails, no donuts in the conference room, just silence. Lana from AP came back from lunch and her badge didn't work. I found her crying in the parking lot next to her Hyundai, holding a cardboard box like it had betrayed her. Langston didn't even pretend to settle in. He started slashing through budgets like they were coupons. Travel frozen. Vendor contracts under review. My inbox turned into a murder scene of cancellation notices. But here's the thing, while he was hacking and chopping in public, he was quietly rearranging the guts of our ledger in private. I knew because I had access. Not the flashy dashboards, no, I had the raw bones, line items, reconciliations, payment records, and they weren't adding up. The first flag came disguised as a consulting expense. Vendor name, Westbridge Global Solutions. I'd never heard of them. No one had, no contract. Just a vague one-liner in the memo field, Q1 strategic review. Amount, $86,400, paid in full. Then 2 weeks later, another payment, $93,000, this time tagged talent pipeline optimization. Sounded fancy, smelled like bullshit. I walked over to Greg's desk. Hey, you know who approved these Westbridge payments? He blinked at me like I'd asked about quantum physics. Langston. I think his office has been doing a lot of top-line vendor restructuring. So, no contract? I don't ask questions I don't want answers to, he said with a nervous chuckle, then swiveled back to scrolling through LinkedIn like it was a Ouija board for job stability. I didn't press. I went back to my desk and ran a deeper search. 6 vendor names I didn't recognize, all recently onboarded. All payments funneled through Derek Langston's direct approval chain. No scopes, no SOs, just glowing invoices with buzzword-laced memos like long-tail talent leverage and sustainable insight onboarding. I wanted to scream. Instead, I logged off early that night. Went home, kicked off my shoes, and sat down at my kitchen table with a lukewarm burrito and my stack of forensic accounting printouts. Cross-referencing payment behavior. Vendor clustering patterns. Red flags for Shell Corp activity. Was supposed to be homework for a certification quiz, but now it felt like reconnaissance. Each course I took, each late-night webinar, started syncing with real-world patterns I was watching unfold in real time. It was like learning how to read a second language and realizing your company had been whispering threats behind your back for months. And then came the silence. Every time I emailed a question about a vendor or an inconsistency, it got slower and slower to get a reply. Eventually, it stopped altogether. I became a ghost. HR stopped looping me in on budget meetings. Procurement marked my access as view only. Even Greg got cagey. Langston wants tighter circles, he mumbled, eyes darting. Don't take it personal, but I did. Because if there's one thing that keeps me up at night, it's silence where answers used to be. In accounting, silence isn't peaceful, it's lethal. It means someone's hiding the trail. I started printing everything, every invoice, every payment stub, every vendor upload notice from the internal procurement system. They thought no one would notice that they'd backdated some of the vendor creation forms. They thought the accounting system didn't log change history. They were wrong. My apartment became a war bunker. Stacks of files, highlighters, my laptop blinking into the early hours while I mapped payments like a detective with string and thumbtacks. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition, and what I saw made my stomach drop. One vendor, Cascade Partners, had the same business address as a landscaping company in Delaware. I checked the state's incorporation records, registered 3 months ago. Contact name, Jeremy Langston, Derek's brother. I didn't know what the hell I'd just found, but I knew it wasn't supposed to be there. I took a breath, closed my laptop, and stared at the wall. Something bad was happening, and I was the only one who saw it. So I did the only thing I could. I kept watching. And I kept learning. Because sooner or later, they were going to come for me too. It started with a whisper, some nonsense about tightening internal controls and reevaluating departmental redundancies. Corporate word salad for, we're digging for scapegoats. By the time the CFO's formal announcement hit our inboxes, it was already too late to act surprised. Subject line, internal audit initiative immediate action required. And just like that, the temperature in the office dropped 10 degrees. But here's the kicker. Finance, my team, was excluded from the process. Let that sink in. The department responsible for monitoring the money wasn't allowed near the money review. Instead, Langston pulled together his own audit task force made up of procurement, HR, and 2 former Deloitte rejects he brought in as consultants. The same 2 guys I once saw spend 30 minutes trying to figure out how to filter a spreadsheet column. They weren't there to find anything real. They were there to pretend due diligence while Langston burned the paper trail behind them. Meanwhile, HR got real busy all of a sudden. A flurry of emails, mandatory form submissions, a new expense policy reinforcement initiative sent out like some damn gospel. It included a spreadsheet of everyone who'd used the professional development program in the last year. I found my name, line 27, a total of $2,894.73, spread across 12 separate reimbursements, all approved, all documented, every receipt uploaded on time. I wasn't worried. Not at first, until Tuesday. The badge scan didn't work when I came in. I stood there like an idiot outside the glass door, my oatmeal leaking into my tote bag, while one of the interns stared at me like I was some ghost of layoff's future. After 5 minutes of awkward waving, someone let me in. I should have turned around right then, walked back out, and never looked back. Instead, I stepped into the HR conference room and came face to face with them. Marie from HR, eyes too wide like she was trying to look compassionate but had overcorrected into horror movie doll territory. And on her left, Derek Langston, not even pretending to drink the complimentary bottled water in front of him, just staring at me like I was gum stuck to his quarterly bonus. Please sit, Marie chirped, like we were doing a wellness check and not a corporate exorcism. I didn't sit, I waited. Marie cleared her throat. We've reviewed several recent professional development reimbursements under your employee ID and found them in potential violation of internal training guidelines. Potential violation, I repeated, deadpan. She nodded. The courses in question were not pre-approved by a manager and were unable to validate their direct connection to your assigned job duties. Langston spoke for the first time then. His voice had all the warmth of a frozen stapler. The optics of this matter are problematic, Sandra. It appears you've been using company funds for self-directed learning that goes beyond your scope. Beyond my scope, I echoed, staring directly at him. I work in finance. Yes, but these are forensic accounting certifications, fraud detection, investigative reporting. That's not your lane, he said. His mouth twitching like the word fraud physically hurt him. And that's when I knew. They weren't just firing me, they were disarming me. Langston didn't just stumble on my reimbursements. Someone pointed them out. And he didn't bring HR into this room to mediate. He brought them in to make it look official while he took out the one person still asking quiet questions about his shell companies. I opened my mouth, then closed it. They were waiting for me to argue, to defend, to lose composure and say something they could use later in an exit report. But I wasn't giving them that. Instead, I smiled. Just barely. The kind of smile that makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean. Marie pushed a manila folder toward me. Your severance agreement. If signed today, you'll receive 2 weeks additional pay. Langston added. You'll also agree not to access or retain any proprietary financial data post-termination. I nodded slowly, picked up the folder, and slipped it into my tote, right next to my oatmeal-soaked scarf and my reusable coffee cup. The same cup I had filled every morning while reviewing vendor transactions that these fools had no idea were still traceable, even when you thought you'd wiped them clean. I didn't speak another word. I walked out like I was heading to lunch. Passed by Greg's desk empty. Of course it was, he knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to duck and cover. Back at my desk, my login still worked for now. I grabbed only 2 things, my plant and my personal drive folder. Not even the whole shared drive. Just a zip file of one specific folder labeled Q4 Draft Recon Review. They'd overlooked it. Probably assumed it was a half-finished reconciliation document, not knowing that buried inside were 6 different versions of our quarterly statements. Drafts they thought had been deleted. Versions that showed a progression, from healthy financials to cooked books, like watching a corpse decompose in Excel. They thought they'd fired a quiet, overly thorough finance drone. They had no idea they'd just handed a loaded weapon to the one person who knew exactly where they buried the cash. I didn't cry when I got home. I didn't scream or pace or call a friend to tell them what happened. I walked straight into my apartment, dropped the tote bag on the floor like it was filled with radioactive sludge, and turned on every light in the place. It was instinct. I didn't want shadows. I didn't want room for doubt. My cat Ledger, yeah, I named him that, just blinked at me from the kitchen table, unimpressed. I poured a full mug of cold brew from the fridge, microwaved it like a savage, and pulled out my laptop. Time of night, 6:22 p.m. I wouldn't stand up again until 4:37 a.m. By the end of the first hour, every surface in my apartment was covered in paper. Bank transfers, procurement records, my own handwritten notes from the training modules. At one point, I used a dry erase marker to map vendor shells across my bathroom mirror. By midnight, it looked like the FBI had raided my one bedroom and left me behind as collateral. Here's the thing about corporate crime. It's never flashy. No duffel bags of cash. No offshore accounts with cartoonish nicknames. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's a $72,135 invoice for pipeline efficiency strategy, consulting paid to a vendor that doesn't have a LinkedIn, a website, or even a working phone number. It's $189,870 wired in 3 separate payments to a logistics solutions firm that, according to the Secretary of State Business Registry, is registered to a P.O. box in Connecticut and shares a tax ID with a coffee shop that shut down in 2019. It's breadcrumbs. And I followed everyone. The first tool I used was a simple forensic transaction tracer I'd built during one of the course labs. It flagged transaction anomalies, things like irregular payment amounts, duplicate vendors with slight spelling differences, and expenses that bypass standard approval flows. I hadn't touched it in months, but now it sang like a canary. Westbridge Global Solutions, Cascade Partners, Helio Management Group, all buzzword factories with no real digital footprint. Their invoices were sleek PDFs with the right fonts, perfect formatting, fake contact names that sounded so corporate it was insulting. But the account numbers, they told a different story. Each of those vendors routed funds into accounts under different LLCs, sure, but the bank branches, all within the same three ZIP codes in New Jersey. The connection? Jeremy Langston. His name didn't show up directly. Two of the shell companies listed a registered agent with an email tied to an old real estate LLC he dissolved 3 years ago. The email bounced back when I tested it, but the domain was still active, and guess who was paying the hosting bill? A corporate credit card tied to the same payment processor used by Derek Langston's prior employer. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I kept pulling threads. They tried to stagger the payments, spread them across departments, mask them under cross-functional initiatives and innovation pipelines. But once you mapped the transaction dates against the audit logs, it was all there, like footprints in wet cement. Langston had built a pipeline, not for innovation, but for embezzlement. And no one stopped him because no one bothered to look. He moved fast, hit hard, and buried the evidence in process language no one dared challenge. The perfect crime. If you don't count me, at 2:13 a.m., I took a break, not because I wanted to, but because my fingers had gone numb from typing. I stood, stretched, microwaved another mug of coffee, and stared at the cluster of printed invoices taped to my kitchen cabinets. My walls looked like a serial killer's vision board. Except I wasn't trying to kill anyone. I wanted the truth. This wasn't about revenge, not really. I didn't want to destroy Derek Langston. I wanted to expose him. I wanted the facts to speak so loudly he couldn't whisper them away. I wanted every person who'd been fired while he pocketed bonus payouts to know they weren't dead weight. They were sacrifices to a golden parachute stitched with lies. By sunrise, I had a working draft of the fraud flow. 19 vendor payments totaling $3.97 million over 18 months. All approved under Derek's authorization. All routed through 3 shell companies tied to his brother. All flagged as strategic expenditures. Not a single legitimate deliverable attached. I saved the file, then saved it again, then backed it up to a hard drive I kept in my freezer. Paranoia? Maybe, but I'd watched enough shady exits to know how quickly access gets revoked when the tide turns. I looked at the numbers again. No emotion, just the math, just the facts. They thought they'd fired an analyst. They didn't know they'd trained an auditor. I took one long sip of stale coffee, scratched behind Ledger's ear, and said out loud to no one in particular, all right. Let's burn the house down, paperwork first. By 9:07 a.m., I'd already showered, printed hard copies of my evidence, and changed into the only blazer I hadn't used to cover a coffee stain in 3 fiscal years. My apartment looked like a crime lab crash-landed in an office depot. I didn't clean it, it was proof. Proof that something mattered enough to lose sleep over. I sat at my kitchen table, cross-checking the final spreadsheet, 43 rows, each one a needle in the side of Derek Langston's personal bank account. I highlighted a vendor row marked Helio MGMT Innovation Consultancy and stared at the memo line, Phase 2 Optimization Framework. The invoice was pristine. The delivery, non-existent. There were no Phase 1 notes, no deliverables, not even an email chain. It was a ghost, just like the $144,000 that vanished with it. The final tally, $3.94 million misappropriated over 18 months, routed through 3 vendors, all approved either directly or indirectly by Langston, most with no accompanying documentation. And the smoking gun, a single expense authorization form from 6 months ago. Signed, time-stamped. Logged to Derek's user ID. One line, vendor already vetted, proceeding with rollout. No vetting existed, and I wasn't the only one who'd see it now. I opened Proton Mail and attached a zip file labeled S. Langston Fin Abuse Doc Final. The file was encrypted, of course, 256-bit, password protected, signed with my digital fingerprint, and time-locked to expire in 72 hours. You don't spend 6 months getting your fraud certs without learning how to protect receipts like they're national secrets. The email had 3 recipients: the lead external auditor from Berenson and Lowell, the board's internal legal counsel, and one wildcard, the chair of the audit committee. I'd never spoken to her directly, but I knew her name. She once froze funding on a $60M acquisition because the founder misspelled a clause in the indemnity section. I kind of woman. I typed a simple note. Subject, urgent financial irregularities, attention required body, documentation attached. Verified trail of misappropriated funds linked to executive approvals. Requesting board-level review. Not angry, not panicked, just facts. I hit send. For a while, nothing happened. I fed Ledger, scrubbed a coffee ring off the counter, stared at the mail slot like a summons was going to materialize out of thin air. By 10:13 a.m., my hands were shaking not from fear but from the vacuum, from the stillness after you pull the pin. At 10:26 a.m., my laptop pinged. One new message, no subject, from H. Michaels at Berenson Lowell Body. Can we talk today? Confidential line below. Please call at your earliest convenience. No sign-offs, no hope you're well. Just 5 words that sliced through the quiet. I dialed. The man who answered sounded like he hadn't blinked in a decade, voice like gravel and certainty. He didn't ask me how I got the documents. He didn't question my credibility. He didn't even waste time confirming what I already knew. We've reviewed the samples, he said. They're real and serious. We're bringing in counsel. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Good, then you'll want the full trail. There's more. He gave me an upload link, not a corporate cloud. Not email, something darker, private, legal. He mentioned it was the same system they used when whistleblowers in healthcare flagged billing fraud, a nuclear bunker, digitally speaking. I spent the next 2 hours curating the package. Not just evidence, timeline, context, annotations, vendor relationships, authorization chains, red flags, and cross-references to company policy violations. I included every footnote Langston hoped no one would read. And I didn't embellish. I didn't speculate. I didn't say a word about being fired. This wasn't a sob story. It was an audit. When I uploaded the file, it felt like pressing the red button in a missile silo. Not a rush, not relief, just inevitability. At 1:34 p.m., another email arrived. This one from a corporate address I didn't recognize. Subject, urgent, audit committee review request body. Ms. Keene, we acknowledge receipt of your documents. A special session of the board's audit committee is being convened today. We may reach out for further clarification. And then, quiet again. I didn't move for 10 full minutes. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge show. I just needed this moment, the silence that meant someone finally heard me, that all those late nights, all those invoices, all those red flags I wasn't allowed to raise mattered. I wasn't back at the company, but my evidence was, and for the first time in years, that was enough. The next morning, the headlines hadn't changed, but the tone inside the company had. At exactly 8 o'clock a.m., a company-wide email went out. No subject line, just a banner marked Internal Communication Confidential. It came from HR. Well, technically from People and Culture, because someone in marketing decided that sounded warmer than the department that hands you a box and escorts you out. Message was short, sterile, corporate bleach for a bleeding wound. To all employees, we'd like to clarify recent rumors regarding the departure of a former employee from our finance team. This individual's exit was a routine HR matter and is entirely unrelated to any ongoing internal or external audits. We remain committed to transparency, integrity, and respectful discourse. Respectful discourse. I almost choked on my coffee. I'd seen more respectful discourse at a gas station brawl over lottery tickets. They were doing damage control, classic PR spin. Discredit the source, isolate the issue, control the narrative. It was textbook and it was pathetic. I closed the email, refreshed my burner inbox, and waited. The next move came from Langston. Around noon, the board sent out a private inquiry to department heads requesting documentation on vendor approval chains. Word got back to me from a former AP analyst I used to share breakroom sarcasm with. Apparently, Langston called an emergency meeting with procurement and legal, claimed all the flagged vendors were standard overflow contracts from his predecessor's tenure, that any discrepancies were innocent misclassifications. Innocent, that was rich. Because while Langston was out there pretending to be the ghost of audits past, I was reviewing the metadata on the very first invoice from Westbridge Global Solutions, uploaded using his login credentials, on a Sunday at 11:47 p.m., 6 weeks after his predecessor had been ousted. Innocent doesn't work when the system logs your fingerprints at the crime scene. But then the real shot came. Around 3:42 p.m., I received a letter delivered to my apartment by courier, black envelope. No return address. You don't need to be a forensic analyst to know what it was. Inside, a cease and desist. The letterhead was from the company's legal department, slick logo, too many commas, 3 pages of threats dressed as etiquette. The message was simple: stop talking, stop sharing, stop forwarding. The grounds: misuse of proprietary financial data in violation of Section 14C of your former employment agreement. Section 14C, I remembered that clause, buried in the fine print like a rusty bear trap. It basically said that any data accessed during your time as an employee couldn't be used externally, even if it revealed misconduct, without express written permission from legal. Cute. They were trying to gag me with the very rope they handed me when I started. I sat back, stared at the signature at the bottom, some VP of legal I'd never met, and then calmly pulled out the certified copy of my whistleblower protection agreement I'd signed the night before with Berenson and Lowell's legal partner. That gag order, it didn't apply. I was now under formal federal whistleblower protection. They'd locked the barn after the horse not only bolted but filed an affidavit, called the press, and built a case. Still, I felt the pressure. My phone buzzed constantly. Unknown numbers, PR agencies, 2 local reporters, someone claiming to be from a reputation management firm who offered to clean up the narrative if I signed a quick NDA. Langston was running his spin game hard, flooding LinkedIn with pre-scheduled posts about corporate resilience, tagging board members, pretending like nothing was burning. But behind those hashtags and faux wisdom quotes, panic. And me? I didn't panic. I prepared. I contacted my lawyer, bulldog of a woman named Marcy, who used to investigate securities fraud, and now wore oversized hoodies and cursed like a war criminal when she drafted ceasefire responses. She read the letter twice, muttered amateurs, and sent back a response so sharp it probably caused paper cuts in legal. We included our whistleblower file log, timestamps, verification chain, and the name of the federal agent assigned to the case. By the time we were done, that gag letter might as well have been written in crayon. But I knew what this was. It wasn't about winning in court. It was about intimidating me into silence. It was about dragging me back into the mud and making me flinch. But they didn't realize something critical. They'd already taken my job. What else were they going to take? My reputation? I'd already handed it over with the evidence. My comfort? That ship sailed the moment Langston's cronies shut off my badge access. There was no leverage left, only truth. And I wasn't done, not even close. Let them send their letters. I had receipts, and they were about to go public. 3 days later, they came in like ghosts. No fanfare, no announcement, no mass email with bullet points and wellness resources. Just three unassuming people in muted suits walking past reception with clipboards and tight expressions, like they'd already seen the rot before stepping into the building. Berenson and Lowell's external audit team didn't need intros. They walked like they had keys to every drawer, and the bones inside knew it. The office went quiet by noon. Even the sales team, usually loud enough to violate OSHA noise standards, fell into murmured whispers. Someone said one of the auditors had pulled Greg into a private room and walked out 5 minutes later without saying a word. Another rumor claimed procurement was told to shut down vendor access until further notice. And in a moment that made one intern physically choke on her yogurt parfait, the main auditor, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice like a fax machine, walked into Langston's glass-walled office without knocking and closed the blinds. Meanwhile, I was sitting on my couch in sweats, watching it all unfold from a distance like a silent god. Because I had already seen the opening move. That morning, my whistleblower protection firm forwarded me a screenshot from the auditor's review room. It was a freeze frame from a body cam worn by one of the investigators, time-stamped and legally archived. In the center of the image, my report spread out on a table like sacred scripture. The lead auditor was pointing at the vendor map I'd built, color-coded, annotated, time-stamped. Her finger hovered over the connection between Cascade Partners and the P.O. box registered to Jeremy Langston. Her face? Frozen, not surprised, just still, like someone seeing a final puzzle piece snap into place. By 3 p.m., the board had been summoned into an emergency session. That's not gossip, that's fact. I received an encrypted update from my contact at the whistleblower firm, all 9 members present. General counsel arrived 10 min early. Langston not yet admitted to session. That mattered. They were keeping him out, which meant they weren't buying his nonsense anymore. The air was shifting. And HR? Oh, they scrambled. A new email from Marie went out to the leadership listserv, subject line, Professional Development Clarification. It was a pathetic attempt at rewriting history. Please note that our internal tracking of employee development programs was limited to general compliance. We were unaware that the training undertaken by former employee Sandra Keene included advanced forensic auditing and financial compliance modules. Translation? Oops. Turns out the woman we fired for misusing funds was more qualified to find fraud than the actual fraud department. I didn't reply, didn't forward it. Didn't scream "I told you so," because silence was power now. Every time they tried to scrub their hands clean, another piece of evidence I'd preserved under password protection surfaced in someone else's inbox. A draft invoice here. A vendor onboarding form there. Even a recorded Zoom call where Langston bragged about streamlining vendor approvals to an investor, recorded without his knowledge by someone who'd been told to shadow leadership meetings for onboarding. They weren't just playing defense anymore. They were bleeding. That night, I received a phone call. Not an email, not a message through my lawyer. A real phone call from the board chair's assistant. Her voice was careful, too careful. The chair would like to thank you for your due diligence. We may reach out for testimony. You are fully protected under whistleblower law. We understand this has been a difficult time. I said nothing for a moment. Then I asked calmly, did they finally open the reconciliation drafts? Another pause. Then, yes, and they're troubling. Corporate speak for we just realized we've been signing bonuses over fraud receipts. I hung up without asking for a timeline or a favor. I didn't need gratitude. I didn't need headlines. I had the truth, and now they did too. Langston didn't show up to work the next day. Greg did, but looked like someone had run over his optimism in the parking lot. One of the consultants vanished from LinkedIn. The other tried to message me some vague apology. I blocked him. HR, they kept quiet. No follow-up memos, no culture reset meetings, no new policies, because when the wolves are already inside the gates, there's no point building fences. I stayed quiet. Sat in my apartment, tea in hand, watching the storm I'd triggered roll across the company like a slow, precise wildfire. Not out of cruelty, not out of vengeance, out of discipline. Let them run, let them scramble, let them taste what they served me, one sanitized. Gaslit, spin-doctored liar time. The truth didn't need me anymore. It was already walking the halls without a badge. The CFO was terminated at 9:43 a.m. on a Thursday. Not resigned, not stepped away to pursue new opportunities. Terminated, one word. Sent in an all-hands email with no signature, no flair. Just a date, a sentence, and the soft thud of 1,000 jaws hitting the floor. By 10:05, Derek Langston had been escorted out of the building by security. A witness snapped a blurry photo of him walking across the parking lot with nothing but his phone, a leather folder, and that punch-drunk look of a man who'd finally realized he wasn't untouchable. I saved the image, didn't share it, didn't need to. At 10:27, Marie from HR resigned. Her farewell email was 3 paragraphs of beige, padded apologies, something about being proud of our DEI efforts and grateful for having served during a time of great transition. Not a single word about Sandra Keene, not a single acknowledgement of the woman she'd accused of stealing from the very company she was protecting. I didn't expect one, because by 11:12, the real show began. The company's legal department filed a formal disclosure with the Securities and Exchange Commission. A contact from the whistleblower firm forwarded me a redacted version of the filing, stripped of names but rich in implication. It confirmed what I already knew. The financial statements of the past 5 quarters were now under federal review. Any public reporting tied to vendor expenditures would be frozen. Earnings guidance rescinded. Investor calls postponed. They used phrases like material misrepresentation and willful concealment. Langston was done, but I wasn't smiling, because winning feels different when the fire was never yours to begin with. That afternoon, my phone started ringing, not just from lawyers, from departments inside the company I hadn't heard from in years. One VP from Risk and Compliance, we'd love to bring you in as a senior forensic advisor. Flexible schedule, name your rate. A manager from Internal Audit, you interested in a rebuild role? You could lead the whole postmortem. Even Greg reached out, left a voicemail, said if you ever want to come back, I'd vouch for you, for real this time. I didn't return the call, I didn't hate him. I just didn't owe him my time anymore. Then came the kicker. 7:34 p.m. that same day, a private number. I let it go to voicemail, but the transcript hit my inbox 30 seconds later. It was the chair of the board. Her voice was precise, measured. She didn't grovel, she didn't flatter. She just acknowledged. You didn't just expose fraud, she said, you preserved us. What you did, if you hadn't, we would have walked into Q3 blind. The financial fallout would have triggered an internal collapse. You saved us from that. Whether you return or not, you need to know that. Then silence, not a pitch, not a job offer, just truth. And that was all I ever wanted. Not a title, not a seat at their crumbling table. Just for them to know I saw what they were too afraid to look at. I sat on my couch, the evening news murmuring in the background, half a bag of takeout noodles congealing in the open container beside me. Ledger napped in a shoebox filled with receipts. My blazer was still draped over the back of a chair, untouched since the morning I sent the final upload. I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. Like exhaling after holding your breath through a minefield. For months I'd been dismissed, stonewalled, dressed down in conference rooms by people who'd never read a balance sheet that wasn't color-coded. But I never needed to scream, never needed to throw a punch. The facts did it for me. And now the very system that tried to erase me was rebuilding itself around the holes I'd carved, one federal investigation at a time. I didn't call anyone back that night. I just sat in the silence I'd earned. Not to be dramatic, just to remember how it felt. The press conference was held in one of those sanitized corporate auditoriums, white walls, soulless chairs, the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they were being interrogated by God. The board chair stood alone at the podium. No co-speakers, no PowerPoint deck, just her, a glass of water, and the weight of the company's rot laid bare. She adjusted the mic. No throat clearing, no small talk. We owe a great debt, she began. The individual whose expertise and discretion exposed significant financial misconduct within our organization. Without her attention to detail, this would have gone undetected and unchecked. This could have destroyed us. She didn't say my name, didn't need to. Reporters leaned in. Questions flew like knives. How long had the fraud been active? Will criminal charges be pursued? Was executive leadership aware? And then, from the front row, NBC's financial correspondent, looking up from her notes. Will she return? Has Sandra Keene been offered her role back? The board chair didn't flinch. She glanced down at her notes, then up again. We have extended multiple opportunities. What she chooses next is entirely her decision. Cut to me, sitting alone in a cafe 2 blocks from my apartment. It wasn't a fancy place. No reclaimed wood counters, just a linoleum floor that hadn't been replaced since Bush Jr., and a waitress who poured refills without asking. My phone sat on the table, screen lit with a live stream of the press conference. Volume low, captions on. I'd seen enough. I locked the screen, slid the phone face down, and stirred my coffee. Across from me sat my old friend Teresa, someone who used to sit next to me in finance before she got laid off during Langston's week of long knives. She watched me quietly, hands wrapped around her mug like she was afraid I'd disappear if she blinked too hard. Then she asked, soft but clear, was it worth it? I didn't answer right away. Because how do you explain that the worth isn't in the applause? It's in the silence that follows when no one dares to question what you've done. It wasn't about payback. It wasn't even about justice in the moral sense. It was about walking into hell with a ledger and walking out with truth. So I smiled, just a little. Best investment I ever made. Teresa laughed under her breath and shook her head. Jesus, you never even raised your voice. No need, I said, reaching for my mug. Behind me, the cafe TV buzzed as the local news came on. The anchor's voice was crisp, smug in that polished cable way. And in a surprise development, the Securities and Exchange Commission has announced that the fraud probe sparked by the initial whistleblower report at Renslow Technologies will now expand to include vendor practices at 5 additional firms nationwide. A source close to the investigation cites identical laundering patterns and shared shell contractors as evidence. I didn't even turn around. I just lifted my mug, slow and steady. Sipped once. Calm, focused. The kind of calm that only comes when the war's over and you know exactly who lit the match and why you let it burn. Let the board clean house. Let Langston vanish into whatever lawyer-funded hole he thought would protect him. Let HR rewrite the narrative in a memo no one would ever read. I'd already done the one thing they couldn't undo. I'd documented the truth, and now it was documenting them. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit him.